It's the 3rd of November, and we're recording for the Lightning Ridge Historical Society. We're out on McNamara. It's the 3rd of November, and we're on McNamara's field. We're recording for the Lightning Ridge Historical Society, and today we're very fortunate to have Ray McNamara, who's descended from the original McNamara who worked the field. Now, hello Ray.
Hello Phil.
We'd like first of all for you to give us some information on the old McNamara, his name and details. Could you help us
Well,
with that?
his name was John Bertram McNamara. He was born in Walgett in 1879, the 8th of July to be exact.
And
his people had a property, they had cattle and horses and so on just out of Walgett. And he was born there, as I say, in 1879, and he lived there and went to school there, and he became a very great musician, even early in life. And his father used to drive him around, take him around to different places in the district, playing for dances, even as almost a schoolboy.
Well, tell me, what was the initial lure of the field? Was it just the opal that dragged him here, the thought of making a
Yes,
fortune?
I think so. I think he was a gambling man.
Well, tell us what you know about when he first arrived here.
Well, he arrived here when my mother and him were married. I couldn't tell you the date, but it was in 1908 sometime. And they came straight here to the ridge and settled over on the 3 Mile Flat, just down the bottom of the hill there. And this is where he worked originally, and I believe it was the first place that he worked here, where he got all the big opal.
The field is named after him. Can you tell us why that was? Was he the first one to work here, or?
No, he wasn't the first one to work here. There were several other people work. It was a going concern here in those days, but he was the one that got the big opal out of it, and he actually found the opal where a lot of other people didn't believe there were opal, and that was in the steel band, which was before you get onto the opal dirt.
I see.
And I understand this from other people, and that told me about it.
Okay. Tell us, Ray, when did you personally first come to the field?
Well, I was born here in 1917, and I got involved with my father in mining early. When I was only quite young, I used to go down the mines with him during school holidays and things like that. And eventually, after I left school, I worked with him for a period from about 1929 or 30 or something like that.
Tell us about those early days. How did you go about mining?
Well, my father and everybody else, they just sank a shaft, and when they got down to what they call the bottom, to the opal dirt, well, they just started putting in drives in several different directions, and they just worked mostly right up near the roof of the drive, and that's where most of the opal was found. And after they've gouged in a certain way, they just chop the bottom right out, all the bottom part of what they call the toe. And of course, many opals were missed on
right. I understand a lot of it was left on top.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
I gather too the landscape was quite different.
Oh yes, the landscape was quite different.
In as much as the Mullock Hills were much bigger.
Mullock Hills were up to 20 feet high, quite a lot of them. And, but today they're all like in miniature today.
Tell us, you obviously knew a lot of the early associates of your father. Perhaps you can discuss some. Maybe I can ask you about Jack the Hornet.
Oh yeah, Jack the Hornet. Well, in my day he wasn't known as Jack the Hornet, but his house was. He built a mud and rock house, which had a little sort of mud funnel coming out for a chimney. And my father was the one that christened it the Hornet's Nest, and eventually, of course, the Hornet's Nest, out of the Hornet's Nest, the man that lived there became the Hornet.
Right. That's interesting because it ties up with other things that we've discussed. What about the other miners, early miners? Who else can you remember?
Well, I can remember many of them in the early days. The Bill the Boar and Big Otto and Little Otto. And
tell us about them.
Well, they were Germans Ottos, and I know they've got a lot of opal around here. Big Otto Schroeder, he lived over in Nobby, just about 3/4 of a mile away from here, I should imagine it would be. And I used to visit him as a child. I used to go around and visit all the old miners and have a talk to them and all that sort of business.
Who was your favourite?
Well, I don't know about the favourite, but I got on very well with all the old miners, and I used to go around and visit most of them. And sometimes, I'd go out shooting kangaroos and things like this.
How did you do for supplies in those days?
Well, in the early days, the supplies came out on coaches and horses. The mail was delivered by coaches and horses, and of course they used to bring most of the supplies out. But in the early 20s, of course, the motor car arrived, and there was a motor vehicle used to bring the mails out from Walgett, and the people that run them were the Smiths, and they're still about the district today. I met one yesterday in Walgett. Really? Yes.
Tell us, obviously your mother was here. Tell us about your home, perhaps, if that's not too personal.
Yes. Well, our first home, I don't remember anything about it because I think my parents had shifted from the first home, which was in the 3 Mile Flat, to the new town. And we first lived in a bark hut. My father built a bark hut, and I think there was about 4 rooms in it originally. And eventually my father he built another weatherboard place while my mother was away in Sydney once, which she didn't know anything about it. She came back.
Lovely surprise.
Yeah.
How many of you were in the family? You have a sister, I know.
Yes, there were 7 of us. There were actually 8 in the family. One died as an infant. I think it was about a year and a half, something like that. Was burnt to death in a bad accident at our home.
That was
at one period.
And what did the others in the family do? Were they interested in mining, or did they get out into the land?
Well, my eldest brother, he did a little bit of work with my father, and then my younger brother, after I left here in 1933, my younger brother, he worked with my father, and he was working with him until the day he died over on the dry rush over there. And my father died at the top of the hole there, had a heart attack and died when he came out of the hole in 1935.
1935. Well, we've come back in off the field now, and we're on Opal Street, back to our old favourite place, the Brady House. Now, I believe that your family has some association with the Brady House, right?
Oh, yes. My father's uncle, an old man named Si Morris, and his wife, Mrs. Morris, they lived here, my auntie. They lived here, and she had, she provided meals for people that lived in the town, like the local constable and that, and different other people that lived here that didn't have any other way of providing meals. She used to come and have their meals there with her, and they lived here for many years. I think they came here in the early 20s.
Can you give us any dates? Or
no, I'm not sure, because I was only very young then, but I remember them coming here when I was very young, and they lived here, and the old chap used to go out droving and working. He never worked in mines very much. As a matter of fact, I went droving with him when I was about 12 or 13 for one period there, cattle droving.
Can you describe the town a little for us, what it was like
then?
Well,
yes, I could. That house was the last house going out of the town, and then there was the next house down there was a place where an old lady, Granny Donnelly, lived, just down there about 100 yards down. Now opposite here is the bush nursing place.
Association, yeah.
I know very well about that because I went there, was attending there for about a year and a half, one period, over a kick from a horse. And then the next place, there was a place down about right opposite where old Lady Granny Donnelly lived. There were people named Dawsons lived there in my day.
Would they be connected with the Dawsons?
Yes, I believe so, yes. There were
store.
2 of the sons that I went to school with, George Dawson and Artie Dawson, I think, the other one. I'm not sure about the names. They were a bit older than me. And then the next house on the left down was where Papa Francis lived, and he was an opal buyer in the early days. And where we lived was over on the hill, where there was only one house over on the hill over there, about 200 or 300 yards.
Donnelly's house.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
behind Donnelly's house. And we were the only people that lived there. And they used to call it Billy Goat Hill, and there was goats here by the millions.
You were telling me early on about, very interestingly, about your father's musical ability.
Oh, yes, yes.
I understand in those days there wouldn't have been very much entertainment. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about
No, well, he provided all the entertainment around. He played for all the dancers in the vicinity, within about 50 miles or so around here. Well, he used to ride a push bike away and ride and play for dancers at Angledool and Gadooga, and even over the border at Hebel, I think he played there, and further out Corinabri and Pocketaroo and all those sort of places out there, Rowena, and you know, they'd have little dances and that. He'd go out and play for them.
What else did they do for entertainment when they had the opportunity?
Well, I think
There was a billiard room, wasn't there?
The billiard room, yes, yes, was a great place for meeting of the miners there at the billiard room, where they'd have their arguments about racehorses and boxes and politics and so on.
Your father was involved with the politically with the Labor Party.
Oh,
wasn't
yes, my father was either secretary or president of the ALP here for I think about 37 years, and he was also involved with the Bush Nursing Association. He was the secretary of the BNA here, and organised race meetings and things for, you know, charitable things for the benefits for the Bush nursing.
Right. Were the miners politically active?
Not a great deal, I would say, but my father was, he knew a lot of the politicians, and he was the one that used to put pressure on the politicians for, you know, help for the lighting
Improvements on the town?
Yes, improvements in the town and whatnot.
Yeah. Do you remember anything of the old town?
Only there were a few people living in the old town. That's about a mile or so east of here, and there were a few people living there in my days, but not very many. And there were just a few remnants of bark huts and things like that there in when I was a young boy here.
Do you know any of the miners who were living out there?
I remember,
in particular?
And I can't remember his name. I remember a man died up there of consumption there one period, my mother used to provide meals, and I used to take it up to him when he was very sick for a long time, but I can't remember his name.
Well, never mind.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to your father, Ray, perhaps you can tell us something more of him, about his opal.
Oh yes. Well, he did get a lot of opal at the 3 Mile on the claim that we saw a little while ago. He got a lot of opal there, and as he cut most of it, he had a foot treadle cutting thing with a stone on it, just a grinding stone.
What sort of stone was it? Do you know?
Oh, like a carborundum stone. I don't think it would be anywhere near as fine as the ones that they use today. Consequently, they'd lose a lot of opal, which then, you know, they don't do today. They weren't as good as what they are today. Yes, and then after he'd cut it and shaped it up in that, then he used to put it on a pumice wheel, at a felt pumice wheel, and take all the grind marks out of it with the pumice. And after that process was done, well, then he had another one, a polishing wheel, which they used jeweller's rouge on.
How was that driven?
By the same way, by a foot treadle, yes, just by a foot with a belt and a foot treadle sort of thing, like an old sewing machine.
Yeah, right. Can you remember any of the actual stones he found? Any ones in particular?
Well, I've still possessed 2 of them, which he wouldn't sell. They were real gems, and he had a brooch made out of it for my mother, and the other one he had a ring made for himself, and they are true gems, both of them.
Have they got a name?
No name, no.
Well, of course, after the cutting comes the buying. Who did he associate with mainly?
Well, he sold quite a lot of opal to a man named Phil Brady. I think he was the original earliest buyer on the field.
Fred,
here.
This is actually
Phil Brady.
his house,
yes,
yeah.
I believe he lived in this house.
Yeah.
I believe he built that house in the early days, and other opal I believe he sold to, I think it was in Adelaide, people named Wollaston. He used to visit the field here, and he sold a lot of opal to Wollastons too.
Do you remember the dealers very much?
Yeah, I can remember Phil Brady very well. Little man.
Phil obviously lived here, but what about the visiting buyers? Where did they
yeah, well, in later years the Shermans used to come here and buy opal. And of course Papa Francis, as he was known in those days, he was an opal buyer here, and he bought a lot of opal around the field. He bought some opal off my father, but I don't think he bought any of the 3 Mile stuff off. Later opal, some of the later opal he bought off him.
How did they get on with the miners?
Oh, they got on pretty good, but you know, it was a friendly rivalry sort of business. You know, the friendly enemies. They were when it came to grafting as much money as you could. Well, they weren't friendly then, but
but getting on to this sort of dissension, was there much dissension on the field? You know, much rivalry between miners?
No, I don't think there was a lot. But in the early days, when people let it be known that they were on opal, the ratters moved in. What was known as the ratters in the early days, and there were quite a few of them. But the miners got rid of them. They more or less found out who they were and got rid of them out of the...
How did they get rid of them?
I think they just warned them to go, get out.
Once they were known, and that was it.
Yes.
What about the local people? Did the miners get on well with the local people?
Oh yes. Well, I think 99% were miners, the local people themselves.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did hear a story. I don't know how true it was about very early, in the very early days, that there was some poisoning of water. No, I don't.
I never heard that, and I've heard many stories from my mother and father, and I just doubt if that happened. It may have happened, but I just doubt it very much, because I think you know, most people that lived in this area, even whether they were good or bad, they realised that water was the one thing that you must have. I don't think it happened.
You travelled a fair way for water in those days, did you?
Well, yes, in the drought periods. Now I remember in one period the wells were empty, and we had almost no drinking water. And to do the washing, my mother and father, we used to load a pram for the baby, and we used to have to load the pram up and take it way down here. Oh, there was a water hole way down in the rocker here, and we used to walk away down there 4 or 5 miles down there and string a line up between 2 trees, and my mother used to do the washing there and spend the day down there until it was all dry, and then back home again.
Well, some of the other characters now, you mentioned earlier on George Lowe. Can you tell us something about him?
No, I can't I think George Lowe went away from this district when I was quite young, and he went away for quite some time, but I think maybe he came back later on, but I just remember the name. I can just...
Okay, well what about, we've got a couple of names here, Johnny Cameron and Bob Bishop.
Oh yeah, Johnny Cameron was, he looked after the mail exchange, and he looked after the horses for the mail exchange. When the coaches came, he'd have all the fresh horses there, and he was quite a character, Johnny Cameron, and he used, all the old miners used to sit around his campfire of a night and exchange yarns and so on, and argue the point about opal and of course the old subjects of politics and religion and boxes and race horses and the like.
The usual things.
Yeah, which most people, and the arguments used to develop into quite heated arguments at times. And I remember one argument there. This old Johnny Cameron he knew quite a lot about racing, because he was involved with racing and that sort of thing up in Queensland. And my father used to argue the point with him about horses, and I think they used to just like to get him going. Anyway, he argued the point about this particular race this day, and he said, "Well, I'll go and prove it." And he had a chaff bag full of papers with all these racing records on. He pulled the chaff bag out, and the rats had been in and chewed the lot right up.
So the rats were pretty rife, were they?
Oh yes, there were quite a few.
Yeah. Well, let's get back onto the mining side of things again.
Yes.
Can you remember some of the other fields? Maybe some of the opal that was found on the other fields?
Yes, I remember about 1920 26 or 27 when the Pandora was found. I saw that about 2 days after it was dug out by a man named Jack McNichol, and that was down, I think it was down an Angledale's fence down there. I saw the place where it came out of, and it was a fantastic opal. It was about, I think, about 4.5 inches long and about 2.5 inches wide in a oblong sort of shape.
Did any other opal come from that area?
Oh yes, there was quite a lot came from that area, that period, and that claim. Well, there was. I remember they were pegged claims everywhere when they.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yes, they were for about a mile every side. It was pegged.
Would that be the gem that stands out in your mind most of all, or would there be others?
That's the one that I remember, because that was found in my day, and then I remember. What was it? The Flame of the World, I think it was. Light of the World. I remember seeing that. I think I'm not sure. I think Frank Brown had that, or one of the Browns had that. But they were the people related to the Bowleses. They were not related to the present Browns here today.
Okay. Tom Irwin. Now, you were going to tell us some stories about him.
Oh yes, well Tom Irwin had a general store here in my day, but in the early days, him and a man named Johnny Bowles.
Can you give us a date?
I think, no, I couldn't give you an actual date, but I think it was around about the end of the war years, about 1918, somewhere around about that period.
That's close enough.
They got a lot of opal up in the cleared line up here, and they got some beautiful stones. I just can't remember, but there was one in particular had some name, but I can't remember what it was now. It's too, because I was only very, very young then, and I couldn't remember it. But I know they did get a lot of opal there.
That was at the cleared line.
The cleared line.
Right,
yes.
Now, Fred Rees talked a lot about Tom Leonard. Can you tell us anything about him?
Yes, I can. Tom Leonard was a boundary rider on Angledale Station, and I was very friendly with his two children, boy and a girl, Tom Leonard Jr. and the daughter's name was Alma, and I used to go out and visit them and stay out quite often out there for a day or two out there with them.
Did they have any association with the mining?
No, not in those days, but I believe at one period Tom Leonard found some signs of opal way out near the 9 Mile there.
Oh,
and they went out later on. Him and somebody else went out later on and tried to find the spot, but they could never find it again.
So it's still there for all we know?
Yes, could be, yes.
The other fellow, Johnny Bowles, you were going to say something about.
Oh, yeah, well, Johnny Bowles, and he was partnered with a man that was, they were married to 2 girls who were related, and the other man was Roy Allport, and they got a lot of opal around here too in one period.
Which fields were they working, can you remember?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it was on the Newtown.
Oh yeah, so when would that have been?
Oh, that'd be early 20s, I think, sometime in the early 20s. I'm not sure in that period either, but that because I was only very young then.
When did they finish around the old town there? There doesn't seem to be much mining at all.
Oh, well, the old town was all mined. Well, there was nobody mining in the old town when I was during the period that I was here. There was, as I say, there was only a few bark huts up there in my day, and there were a few deserted holes, but nobody mining there.
So it was all worked out.
Yes.
Well, Ray, we're running short of time now, but what I'd like to ask you before we eventually round up is, you went to school here. Tell us something about what it was like for kids and what the school was like.
Yes, well, I suppose it was like most country schools. There wasn't very many children going to school here. It might have been about 50 or 60.
As many as that?
Yes,
quite a few, actually.
Yes, around about that, I should imagine. There was one teacher there teaching a lot.
Remember his name or her name?
Well, when I first went to school, I think the teacher's name was Watson, and he was here yes, and then there was another teacher named Shaw. I think he was after Watson. He was here for a few years, and then there was another teacher came here. His name was McNamara, but he wasn't here for very long. And then Mr. Murphy was a teacher here, and I remember him vividly. And he taught me most of my time here from the time I was about 9, I think.
What would that have been? What date would that be?
That would be about 1926, I'd say, from then on till I left here, till I left school, which was about 1931.
And during all that time, was the same schoolroom used, or
the same schoolroom was used?
Would that be the
yes.
old one that's still here?
That's the same old schoolhouse that's here.
Was it in
now.
the same position?
The same position, yes. Only it's
So we've just built up around it.
It's built up around it, and I was surprised when I looked at it. I thought it was much bigger than it was.
Well, Ray, thank you very much for helping us like this.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Today is the 25th of November 1982. This is further to the interview that the Historical Society of Lightning Ridge had with Ray McNamara at Lightning Ridge a few weeks back. I'm going to pass the microphone now to the McNamara family, and they'll introduce themselves by telling you their names, starting with Ray.
I'm Ray McNamara, and I'll pass the microphone over to my sister, Phyllis.
I'm Phyllis McNamara.
Quite loud, Phyllis.
I'm Phyllis McNamara, and I'll give the microphone over to Dick.
I'm the baby of the family. 56 years of age, but I started school there at Lightning Ridge at 7 years of age. And I don't know whether it started in 1934 or actually probably 1935, because it was late 34 when I turned 7. But those year or two that I had at the school there, I'll never forget. You know, at 7 years of age, I thought it was a great time to be starting school.
Yep. Now, this is Terry.
I'm Terry McNamara, and I left Lightning Ridge in 1935. And, what do you want to...
When Dad died.
Well, Ray, you might remember some of the teachers that you had at Lightning Ridge back in the earlier days of your life, if you can think of some of them.
Yes, I think the first teacher I can remember was Mr. Shaw. I think when I first started, I think Mr. Shaw was the teacher, and I think it was somewhere around about 1923 or 24. After Mr. Shaw left there, I don't think I'd be very old, probably about 7 or something like that. And then the next teacher that I can remember was Mr. McNaught. Mr. McNaught was there, and I believe Mr. McNaught lost his wife died a period shortly after he came there. And then we had another teacher that wasn't there very long also, and I think his name was Tabor, if I can remember rightly. I wouldn't guarantee that, but I think that's who the person was. And then the last teacher I had was, or the teacher that I remember most was Mr. Murphy, and he was my teacher from, I'd say from the time I was about 11 till I was about 14. In the last period of my schooling, a man named Mr. Keynes. Well, I don't remember whether he used the cane very much, but it's a very topical name for a school teacher. But
Have any of you got something you'd like to add there, what your brother was saying? Any thoughts you had?
No, that was, he just should have mentioned...
When you speak, hand the microphone over.
His name was Eric Keynes,
Yeah.
was the teacher.
Yeah.
Eric Keynes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. You got anything to say about that?
Very close.
No, my first teacher was Mr. McNamara, and he wasn't there very long. And then there was another man named Mr. Watson, and after he, I think Mr. Shaw was the last one that I was there with.
How many children was there when you were going to school?
Oh, don't ask me that. I can't remember exactly how many. I think there must have been about 40 or 50, I suppose.
And
we were
only
all in one room
with one teacher?
with one teacher, yes.
One
And while the teacher was up teaching one end, the other kids were mucking up down the other end. I remember that.
This was in the late 20s or early 30s, or when, approximately?
Yes, that would have been in the 20s. In the 20s,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Now what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, I think I'm just in the film, I'm not sure. What I'd like to do is to ask you a little bit about your parents, if you wouldn't mind, please. I'll pass over to you, Phyllis, to start with, and maybe you'll tell us the things that you knew about your mother, things that you'd like history to know about your mother. The photos I've seen of her, she looked to be quite a nice woman.
Yeah. Yes, she was. She was a very good woman and a very kind mother to us. And she was a very hard-working mother with a big family. And I remember the times when we didn't have any electricity or any kind of modern things like they have now, and comforts and one thing and another. She had to work very hard washing and scrubbing with just her hands, and having to boil the clothes up in a kerosene tin out on an open fire. And I remember once in a drought time when there wasn't any water close by the house, we had to go out to in the bush somewhere and wheel the clothes out in a little billy cart, and my mother had to make a fire out there, and I went out to help her with the washing, and we had to get water out of an open shaft in the bush, you know, where an old well that had some water in. We had to dip it out with buckets and do a washing just in dishes and buckets out there and hang them underneath the trees, because it was drought time and there wasn't any water. And the only kind of lamps that we had were just ordinary kerosene lamps or candles. And many times I had to do my homework at night with just a candle, flickering candle, and read my books and so on with a candle. Things like that. It was a very hard life.
Hurricane lamps.
Yeah, hurricane lamps and things of that kind. Now, I'll pass the microphone back to you again, Phyllis, and maybe if you can remember a little about where your mother was born, we would like to know that. Maybe you could give us her full name. If you can't remember that, maybe some of the others may be able to give us some of the early history.
I know.
A little bit about her and your grandparents.
Yes, well, her name was Violet Evelyn Jewell. Violet Evelyn Jewell. And I don't know where she was born. She was born in Walgett, so Ray said. And Ray would know more about that because he's seen the marriage certificate. He found out what was the date of their birth, so I'll pass it over to Ray.
Yes, Mum was born in Walgett. Also, Dad was born in Walgett, and Mum's parents had a fruit shop in Walgett there at one period, and other periods during my mother's early life, they had like halfway houses along, you know, with like meals and accommodation and things like that in between townships. They had one, I know, down on the Barwon River, down between Walgett and Brewarrina, and they had another one at between Walgett and Burren Junction, somewhere along there, out towards Pilliga. Yeah,
would you know the approximate year when your mother was born?
Yes, Mum was born in 1884, on the 7th of January.
At Walgett?
At Walgett, yes, yes.
And maybe, Terry, can you remember anything about your mother you'd like to pass on?
Well, I can only remember Mum for her hard work and the way she looked after us. I know she done everything all her life to help us, and same with Mum and Dad. And,
could you tell us how old she was when she died and where she died?
80.
She died in Sydney at Moorong Hospital at the age of 80 years, and she had cancer, and that she was only in there a few days. She was in the last stages of cancer when I looked after her for the last 4 months at home, and the doctor insisted on putting her into hospital for the last few days, and she died at Moorong Hospital at Ryde.
What year?
In 1964, in September 1964.
Now, while you got the microphone, Phyllis, what can you tell us about your father?
Well, I know Dad was a disciplinarian. We all knew that. See, if you didn't do what you were told, you soon got the results of it. And he was fairly strict with us, and he always said, speak once, and then if they don't come to heel, get the stick out. Because he believed in speaking once and you were expected to do it, and I soon learned about that. But he was a very hard-working man, and he was also very interested in politics and civic affairs. And I remember when I was in primary school, I remember that he was I think he was the secretary of the Progress Association or the Parents and Citizens. He was always involved in the public affairs and very interested in politics. And if anybody needed...
He was JP also.
He was a JP, and also if anybody needed a form filled in or any help to get a pension, he was the one they came to, and he would help them to fill in their forms and make claims for pensions or whatever, anything that they could get from the government to improve the community. He was always interested in and worked for and on behalf of. Remember that?
Yes. Can you remember when he was born, his year of birth?
Yeah, 1879.
Well, Ray said it was 1879, but of course I don't remember that. I'm not quite that old. But
Can you fill us with...
I remember when his birthday was
8th of July.
8th of July, and Ray's was on the 4th of July, yes, I remember that.
Did you ever, as a young girl, go mining with your father?
No, not ever. Though I went out with my brothers walking in the bush, and sometimes we climbed down into people's shafts to have a look. Had to leave yourself. You had to step from one side of the shaft to the other to go down. But no, I didn't ever go down with Dad. I think the boys did, but no, I didn't.
Could you just pass the microphone to Dick?
Right.
Dick, well, I'd like to just hear from you, your relationship with what you and your dad.
Well, my relationship with Dad was very minor, really, because there was no close relationship between Dad and I. As our child, love dwelled deeply into me with my mother, and there was a close relationship between Mum and I. And I think very likely because the child before me, who was born before me, died before he was 2 years old. He scalded, and he died of pneumonia. So I don't know whether I had any special looking after because of that. Maybe I had a special treatment, but there always seemed to be a strong affection between me and Mum from that time, from early childhood right through until even now. You know, I still feel deeply in love with my late mother, and I could never change that feeling that I had.
So you never done any working with your dad at any time?
No, I didn't, no. I was too young, really. I was only just past my 9th birthday when Dad died. I was still I'd only been to school for probably 2 years. And Terry was working with him.
I worked with him.
Well, we'll pass it on to Terry now.
Yes, I worked with Dad from the time I left school, for 14, until I was about 16 and a half. When Dad died, I worked in the mines, and then of course we came to Sydney. That was...
Terry?
Yes.
Was you working with your dad when he died?
Yes, I was.
Take the microphone up to your mouth.
Yeah. Yes, I was. I was with him when he died.
You actually seen him die?
No, well actually, I went home early, and because when he didn't come home at the proper time, well, I went back to look for him, and I found him dead at the bottom of the mine. Then
Bottom of the dump, really.
he'd come up the shaft and was down at the bottom of the dump.
Whereabouts was he buried?
In Walgett.
In Walgett.
Hmm.
In Walgett.
Yeah.
Righto, Ray, we'll talk a little bit about you and Terry working with your dad, the dry road.
Yes, well, I worked with Dad after I left school for a period, I can't remember how long, maybe in 6 or 9 months or something like that. It wasn't a long period. And Dad worked a claim, I believe it was a claim that was worked before him by a man called Darky Robinson, who got quite a lot of opal there some years before. And I worked there for maybe 6 months, and we had only primitive conditions. Was an ordinary windlass, and I used to fill the buckets down below, and Dad used to wind them up and dump all the mullock out on the dump, and then we used to go down, and I'd be in one drive and Dad would be in another, and we'd be gouging away there for 3 or 4 hours until it was lunchtime, and if I got anything, well, I'd take it and Dad would have a look at it, and we had a little bough shed down the bottom of the mine where we used to boil the billy up, and we'd go there and have our lunch there, and that went on for about maybe six or 8 months or something. But we were getting some opal all the time. It wasn't very valuable then, but maybe it was all a similar type of opal. Just put a bit closer to your chin.
Yeah. Yes, we did. We got a little bit of opal, but I'd say that it was just about enough to live on, But
You can't remember those days, Terry, how much a carat you got for your opal.
no, but I know I think we had to sell it for less than what it was worth.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But
That's for sure.
Who the buyer was?
Jack Francis was the buyer in those days.
Who done most of your cutting?
Well,
Dad did most of it.
Dad used to split the stones, and he'd done most of that himself.
What did you work the windlass yourself mainly?
Yes, I'd work that, and was down underneath. It was all timbered. It was an oil mine, and was all timbered for a long way around. Like it was.
What level was you on, the first or second level, Terry?
Well, I'd say we were about 60 feet down.
On the second level?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Maybe you'd like to give Phyllis a little say now before we...
What do I know about the mines?
Well, you're telling us that Dad lived in hope.
Oh, well, the only thing I could say is that we were very poor and we didn't get much out of the opal, but we still got 3 meals a day. We still lived through it all. But Dad always lived in the hope that one day he'd get that big stone that'd get us out of all our problems and pay all our bills and give us something nice to live on, to live with. But, well, some of my memories of Lightning Ridge was going out looking for the goats or seeing the goats come home, and I can remember when Terry used to milk the goats. And he'd be in the pen there with the goats and knew them all by name and had great patience with them and could milk them all and get good results. There were a few goats that were a bit obstreperous, and like one called Old Wildy, I think, which Dad could never milk, but Terry and Mum could manage her all right. But we went for walks in the bush. There were no entertainments in Lightning Ridge in those days. Had to make your own entertainment. And we used to go for walks in the bush, and sometimes there'd be some water up in an area where there was a swamp and you could go paddling. Yes, Galah Swamp they called it. And there was also a creek at the end of the schoolyard called Dooley's Creek, and whenever there was a storm we all rushed out after school, took our shoes and socks off and waded through the creek, and that was really something.
And what about you, Dick? Have you got any memories?
Well, I know that Dad, at some age, I suppose I must have been very close to 9 years of age, but I know for about the last year I was up there, I used to take the goats for a walk in the afternoon from home out to the watering tank and give them a drink. And in the morning, when they were milked, I remember I had 1 can of milk that I used to deliver to one place about a mile away from where we lived, up past our school. And I used to walk up there every morning, or was it every morning or 2 or 3 mornings a week, and I walked into this camp one morning and the man was there, but he was dead. That was the end, of course, of that delivery.
Who was the gentleman?
Bill Gordon.
Ah, Bill Gordon.
Mm.
Terry, how about that fella you used to call him Campbell Will Maringle?
Oh, okay.
Who?
Colin O'Neill.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Bill Gordon. We used to go out shooting one period, and he used to lend us his rifle. We'd go out shooting. We went out shooting kangaroos on different times. That's one thing I remember about old Bill Gordon. And another chap and myself used to go out shooting, but once I shot a kangaroo, and that was the end of it. I couldn't shoot anymore. So.
Yeah.
What do we do now?
Call him Campbell Will Maringle.
Oh no, that's
Any memories you got at all, Terry, you'd like to say? Finish up. Put the mic up close.
well,
because the goats were, to milk the goats and to sell the milk was a part of our living in Lightning Ridge. I used to sell milk to about 3 or 4 different customers before I went to school in the morning. And, well, it's just part of our living.
Yeah, life was very hard though.
It was hard.
It was hard, no
Yeah.
money for opal.
And I know my day started early and finished late. It was a hard life.
Well, I'd like to thank all you McNamara family, Phyllis, Dick, Ray and Terry, on behalf of the Lightning Ridge Historical Society. We thank you for all that you've done for us and helping. Well, this is a beautiful yard you got here, Mrs. Darby.
Yes.
It's a lovely yard.
Some mows it for me,
It's beautiful.
and we get a lot of leaves naturally. But my granddaughter, great-granddaughter, she comes up and rakes up for me.
It's lovely. And what a lovely place Woy Woy is.
Yes, I like it.
It's beautiful here, yes.
And I've got my fernery down there, and my hobby is growing bromeliads.
Oh, yes.
If you know anything about those.
There'll be other people who see this film who I'm sure will.
Ah, yes.
But you've got a lovely yard here.
Yes, now look, if you'd like to get that flame tree, isn't it gorgeous? See that red tree way over there?
It's a beautiful colour, isn't it?
Oh, lovely.
What was the name of that tree again?
Illawarra flame tree.
An Illawarra flame tree.
Yes.
Illawarra, yes. Isn't that lovely, gorgeous colour? And considering it's a dull day and there's no sun out,
No, that's right.
the colour is absolutely magnificent.
More out this year all around than you would ever suspect of growing.
Yes,
And we got the 10 inches of rain in the spring, and I think it was just right for them.
yes,
The jacarandas and the flame trees have been gorgeous this year.
lovely.
They've been for years.
Today is the 31st of December 1982. First, oh well, I've made a mistake already. I hope I don't make too many more mistakes on this date. But today's the 1st of December 1982, and I'm here at Woy Woy with Mrs. Darby, an old
Wife of George Darby.
the wife of George Darby from Lightning Ridge, and she's going to tell us a little of the early days at Lightning Ridge. We're going to pass it over to her now, the microphone, and leave it in her capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mrs. Darby, I think the first thing we'd like to know would be where you was born.
I was born in a place called the Grove in Paddington in 1898, February the 6th, 1898.
And could you give us your full maiden name, please?
Mary Helen Courbaron.
Mary Helen Courbaron.
Yes, Courbaron, French name.
Now, we would very much like to know how your parents decided to go to Lightning Ridge, or you, whichever the case was.
Well, I went with Watty Bors had bought the hotel at Lightning Ridge. I think he bought it from the Renishes, if I'm mistaken.
Roughly what year?
No, he bought it from the Myers. I forget the year.
Approximate.
Oh, let me see. I'd have to go back a while. About 1917. 1917. And Watty Bors had bought the hotel from Myers, Max Myers, sit down there, if you can. And he also had the store, and I went up there to look after the store for him. That's how, yes.
Now, when you got there, you were single when you went up there?
Oh, yes, yes.
You were single when you went up
Yes,
there?
yes.
Well, we'd be very grateful if you would tell us how you become married to Mr. Darby.
Well, I knew George only vaguely, and he thought I was a stuck-up piece. However, his father was there, and the wild lilies used to grow down at the tank, and I went, and I had to pass the house, the Darby house, to get to the tank, to ask Mr. Darby Senior if I could pick a bunch of these wild lilies. And at that time, silk stockings were just beginning to come in, and they only came to the calf. The rest was, the tops and the feet were made of lisle. And I'd got a burr in my stocking, and I pulled it, the thread, and the silk parted from the lisle. And I was very embarrassed having to go past the Darby house with Georgie Jack there. And actually I wasn't stuck up, but I was very shy those days. Anyhow, I was coming back with my bunch of lilies, and they had a big white sow. And as I passed the house, they ran this sow out from the side of the house in the yard, and it had a big red geranium tied onto its tail. Let us take a rise out of me. Anyhow, I went along, stood with my head in the air, and that passed. But I've often thought of it and laughed over it since, you know. It was a very funny thing, yes.
That's how you first met him?
Well, no, you gradually got to know him, and then we used to go riding, Mrs. Bors and I, on Sunday afternoon, and I borrowed a horse from him. He lent it to me, and he was adjusting he told me afterwards, he said, I was adjusting your stirrup irons, and it's not, oh, she's not a bad girl after all. So really,
yeah.
We got to know each other from then. And then we were married in Walgett, because the priest wouldn't come out to the ridge at the time, and married in Walgett on the 21st of September 1918.
1918,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you tell us something about George, about him?
Well,
before you married him and then after you married him?
Well, he didn't do any opal digging very much. He did some, but not much.
What was he associated mainly with?
Well, he had a dairy and a butchering shop.
I know, yeah. At Lightning Ridge?
At Lightning Ridge.
That's very interesting.
Oh, yes, and then we had a paddock where we took horses on adjustment. And we used to make a fairly good living there. Yes.
Now, there's a little rush at Lightning Ridge called Darby's Rush. Would that be associated?
Well, I don't know where that is.
That's just up behind Newtown, in the bush behind Newtown.
Up that way.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I was just wondering whether your husband was the founder of that little rush.
Well, he could have been, I don't know, but when they first came, they came from Gadooga to Lightning Ridge in 1909, I think.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh, no, must have been early because my husband was only 9 years old when they went there. He was just a boy. And Mr. Darby Senior had a butchering business there.
That would be at the old town?
Yes, the old town. There were the Donnicks and the Darbys, and who else? About the first 3 families there, I think.
Wonderful if you could remember that for us.
I can't remember the 3rd family. No, I can't remember that.
See, there's nothing left of the old town.
Oh no, I suppose it's gone
all
completely,
gone.
like
Yes.
Angledool.
Like
Yes.
The old town was down near Sims's Hill.
Yes.
Right near
Yes.
Sims's Hill,
Yes.
Rush, yes. Can you remember anything about that old town, what it looked like?
No, there used to be an old large storeroom, which was a shop there then,
Yes.
but there wasn't very much there even then.
It was a shanty town.
Yeah, sort of a shanty, I think, where the miners lived. Mm.
Whereabouts did you live in those very early days?
Down in the tank paddock, about a quarter of a mile out on the Angledool side. You know, you went down that way to the 3 Mile,
Yes.
and instead of turning that way, you came straight on down to us.
Down to you,
Yes.
Yeah, oh yes, I know, what they
Yes.
call the government tank.
Where the government tank was, it's
Yes.
only a puddle hole now, but it was a very nice
Right,
tank.
well I just live up from that, not very far.
Oh, do you?
How long
Yes.
since you've been to Lightning Ridge now?
Oh, it must be 6 or 7 years now.
6 or 7 years, yes.
Yes. yes.
Well, you would have noticed a great difference when you come back there. after
Oh,
all
very
those years.
much. We had no water, so that there was no hot water or anything like that. You had to heat everything. We had a very good, everything was fuel. But I was only talking the other day about the girls today, they have everything laid on. And we had to work hard, but we were contented. And I think that was everything, really. But cooking, and I had 3 little kiddies in 3 years and 4 months. Even then, we found time to go to tennis once a week, and we served on a tennis committee and a hospital committee.
They had all those things at
Those
Lightning Ridge?
times, yes, those times.
Can you remember anything about Charlie Nettleton?
Excuse me, I've just thought of the third family. I think it was the Murrays. Jack Murray.
Jack Murray.
Yes, because he worked on Durhamville, and he was actually the first man to find opal.
Was he? Can you
Yes,
tell us a
because he
little
was
about
a boundary rider, and where the rain had washed little gutters in the ground, he saw this pretty glass sparkling,
Yes.
and it turned out to be opal washed to the surface.
And is that...
And Mrs. Jack Murray told me, she said, we didn't value, she said they had she remembered having a little cask about 15 inches high, and she said they were getting these knobbies and they were snipping them to pieces looking for better colour. Oh, that's no good. Toss it into the cask, and until it was filled. And Mr. Murphy, the opal buyer, gave them £30 for it. So what he made out of it, I wouldn't know.
Did you ever meet Mr. Murphy
Oh,
yourself?
yes.
You've seen him?
Yes. I remember him.
Can you describe what he looked like?
Well, if I remember rightly, he was a fairly big man.
Mm-hmm.
He had a shop in Market Street, Sydney. There was also Tom Brady, Philip Brady, and Ernie Sherman, and his sister. Bertha didn't live at the Ridge, but Ernie had a shop in, not a shop, but he had an office in Market Street, and Bertha looked after that end of it. And that's how he really started at White Cliffs. But he told me that when he arrived in Australia, he had half a sovereign in his pocket.
Is that Mr. Murphy?
Ernie Sherman.
Ernie
Yes,
Sherman,
he was
yes.
an Englishman.
Englishman.
And yes, they came from Devonshire, and then he went to the Ridge and was buying, and he lived very frugally. In fact, the rumour was that he lived on bread and treacle. Anyhow, he went to England for a trip, and he married a girl who was his one-time sweetheart in the early days in England. Well, he finally married her. I met her, very nice person, and their first children, only had twins. They had twins. And, of course, the rumour went round then, don't eat bread and treacle, look what it's done to Ernie.
Oh, yeah.
But E. Gregory Sherman is his son, you know, the opal bar.
Yes. I know him very well.
You do?
Yes.
Yes, well, and he had a sister, because I haven't seen him since he was a little boy.
Yes,
No,
yes.
I wouldn't know him now.
Now, coming back to Charlie Nettleton, did you ever see the man?
No, I don't remember having seen Charlie Nettleton. He more or less, I think, settled at the 3 Mile, which they call Nettleton after him.
Yeah, Nettleton's flat.
Yes, that's right, Nettleton's flat, yes.
There was a post office there?
I can't remember because we would have nothing to do with it
I
actually.
see.
We always...
Yeah, well, Freddie Bodell, did you know Freddie
Yes,
Bodell?
I knew Fred Bedell
Well, Freddie Bodell told me that there was a post office there.
Yes.
There was a boarding house there.
Yes.
There was a school there.
Yeah.
There was tennis courts out the back. There was quite a lot
Oh,
of things.
well, I think they might have did that after we left there.
I see.
'Cause
Yeah.
we left there about 1927, I should think.
That would be there before then, I think.
Well, it may have been too, but we never had much...
I've already seen a postal stamp with Nettleton on it and the crown.
Oh, have you?
Yes, there's one
Oh.
at Lightning Ridge at the moment. Somebody
Oh.
found it out where the old post office used to be.
I see.
Made of brass, and it's
Oh.
got the crown on it,
Yes.
and it's got Nettleton on
Oh.
it. There's other things on it too,
Yes,
I just cannot
yes.
remember.
Oh, they may have had the post office there.
Yeah, I heard that Charlie Nettleton only stayed there for a very short period of time and then he went away and then
Yes.
come back later on.
Oh, probably.
That's what I
I don't
heard.
know. Yes. Because that was before my time, really.
Mr.
Yes.
Murphy wrote about Charlie Nettleton in his book.
Oh, yes. Very likely.
Yeah, they struck open.
Because they were more contemporaries, you know, of the times. Yes.
I would like to know as much about the Murray family as you could think, any little thing at all.
Well, Jack Murray, he became a teamster, a driver. He used to drive the team from Walgett with loading for Lightning Ridge and so on. But for a number of years, I think he was on Dunumbrell before they settled at Lightning Ridge, and they had 6 children. The eldest boy, Victor, I don't know what became of Vic or any... Well, the girl, I think she married one of the Kennedys, Ogie Kennedy. But is this all right? I'm not dropping...
You're going very good.
But they settled there, and that's what Jack used to do. Teamwork, you know, the teamster,
And
yes.
Can you remember the other children? You've told us 2.
Well, Billy was the youngest. Oh, there was Victor, Bubba. We called her Bubba, the eldest girl. I can't recall her Christian name. She was nicknamed Bubba, and everybody knew her as that. She married Frank Kite, the big gun shearer that was at those times, Australian champion, and I think he beat them in America because it was all blade shearing then. There was Billy was the baby. Goodness, there was 2 or 3 in between that I just can't remember their names now.
Any of the boys follow the Opal game?
I don't know whether Victor did or not. I think he must have done because he'd have to make a living, and there wasn't any other work very much there.
Now, they were living on Dunmorville Station, but did they move into Lightning Ridge later on?
They lived... Do you remember where Mrs. Ma's boarding house is?
No.
Well, we lived there afterwards. Well, you know where the hotel is?
Yes.
Well, I would say they lived about 6 or 7 blocks down from the hotel on that side,
Yes, yes.
toward the Dooley.
Yeah, toward
Yes,
the Dooley.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
Ah.
Mm.
Now, the other family you mentioned, the early family, what was their names?
Dominick's?
Dominic.
Oh, yes, well, Albert and Jack Dominick and Granny Dominick. They lived up on the top end of Morella Street, up near the Church of England.
Yes.
And 3 cottages there alongside one another. And they had a Ford car each, Jack and Albert, and they used to run them for hire. And they did very well too, driving sheep buyers and people into Queensland and back, or taking people from Lightning Ridge to Walgett and back and so on. They made did quite well for themselves. And Albert had a bed knob on his radiator. So the car was known as the Flying Bedstead. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, then he got the post office, and he had 2 children, Percy and Eula. Eula married one of the Kennedy boys too. There was a large family of Kennedys, and I forget which one Eula married, but of course she died many years ago. And Percy went into camp, I think there was a camp at Cowra, where he was stationed. I don't know whether it was guarding the Japanese prisoners or not, but he got pneumonia and died. He hadn't married.
Any of the family at all work on opal in those early days at all, in between other jobs?
Well, then Albert and Jack, particularly Albert, became an opal buyer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes, oh yes, he did. And I could tell you something, I don't know whether I...
Come on, tell us.
Well, he was the postmaster, and the buyers would wire certain men on the ridge, telling them that they'd be up there visiting to buy on certain dates. So Albert would rush in and buy up. So it got so bad they did hold an inquiry into it. I remember it was held one night there, but nothing came of it. He was severely reprimanded. And then after that, the buyers in Sydney had to use a code message. If they wanted to let anyone know that they were coming to the ridge, they had to send their telegrams in code so that he couldn't read it.
Oh, that's a very interesting